An open letter to Governor Schwarzenegger. California is in crisis. The state budget deficit is estimated at $24 billion, and next year it'll be even worse. Voters recently rejected tax increases. The state's political leaders are trying to cobble a budget with drastic spending cuts that threaten basic securities. Straightening out the budget mess will be extremely difficult, and for many, especially the most vulnerable, it will be painful. However, there is a simple solution that might go a long way toward easing or even eliminating the deficit: a tax on usury. Usury is the charging of unreasonable or excessive interest, or interest in excess of that allowed by law. Laws prohibiting usury vary from state to state. California's Constitution prohibits usury. The law is fairly complex. What law isn't? But basically it boils down to this: interest on a loan can't be more than 10% per year. That's the law. But any Californian with a credit card in their wallet knows that the law is a sham and a mockery. The problem started in 1978 when the Supreme Court ruled that national banks can charge the highest interest rate allowed in the bank's home state, regardless of where the borrower lives. In the late 1970s, Citibank persuaded South Dakota politicians to wipe out its usury laws. In return, Citi moved its credit card business and a few thousand jobs to Sioux Falls. There is nothing to prevent a lender from setting up shop in South Dakota and exporting excessive interest rates to California, even though Californians have outlawed usury. South Dakota picks up a few jobs, while California consumers and businesses are burdened with debilitating debt. It hardly seems fair, but that's the law. The solution is to tax usury. The banks may scoff at California's usury law, but the legislature and/or voters retain the right to tax. Any interest payments in excess of 10% could be taxed. The usury tax would be collected from the usurers, the lenders. There are, of course, restrictions on states' rights to tax interstate commerce. A tax must not be unreasonably burdensome. The usury tax would merely tighten the loophole the bankers have used to circumvent the California Constitution. There is nothing unreasonably burdensome about taxing unreasonable interest. An added benefit is that a usury tax could wipe out the budget deficit. A good estimate is that Californians have about $1.5 trillion in personal household debt outstanding, including mortgage and consumer debt. It is conservatively estimated that Californians pay more than $10 billion in usurious mortgage-related debt, and more than $15.6 billion in usurious consumer-related debt. In other words, a usury tax could generate $25.6 billion in tax revenue. That's enough to pay off the budget deficit, maybe run a surplus, and possibly enough left over to give the citizens of California a substantial tax credit. Problem solved. The usury tax could fill state coffers, pay off existing state debt, and put money back in the hands of the taxpayers. The usury tax could be a great economic stimulus package. Excessive debt payment could be converted to productive use, as that money moves back into circulation through the state economy. Of course, it won't be quite so easy. The banks would scream and threaten, and they will sue. Ultimately, the banks have no moral, ethical, or legal ground to support the practice of usury. If the banks don't want to pay the tax to California, all they have to do is comply with state law and offer a fair deal to their customers. The banks could still collect and keep interest payments up to 10%. But any business model based on usury is deeply flawed. The biggest obstacle to imposing a usury tax is not the courts. It's the intimidating power of the banks and the cowardice of elected officials to do the right thing. Despite the seduction of greed and the lure of easy credit, truths remain self-evident. Usury is so bound up with injustice that its practice cannot fail to result in increasing the severity of hard conditions. Great civilizations flourished without charging any interest whatsoever. All major religions condemn usury. Many of the greatest minds in history denounced usury. The simple truth is that usury is unethical, immoral, and illegal. Californians have been cheated of the lawful protections against usury. Enacting a usury tax would require that California's leaders would have to stand toe-to-toe against the financial lobby. Our politicians would have to do more than talk. They would have to prove they can't be bought. California's response to the budget crisis has been called dysfunctional because Californians want to spend on worthwhile causes, but they want to keep taxes low. We've been told it's impossible. Now, a refusal to raise taxes is leading to drastic spending cuts. Here's the real dysfunction. If a thief breaks into your home and steals your money and your food, would you look the other way? Would you tell a sick spouse there's no money for their health care? Would you tell a famished child to sit in the corner and starve? No, never. California can have low taxes and vital government services and protections. The time has come to chase away the thieves that have been stealing California's prosperity and future. The time is now for the usury tax. Sincerely, Bankometer.com.